Meanwhile, in the capital, unknown men have beaten up the leader of a local Jewish movement. The attackers reportedly hit him with bats and shouted anti-Semitic slogans. Just months ago, the rabbi was seen addressing the crowds in Maidan.
Jews have a tradition not to get involved in conflicts, not to meddle with power. We must stand aside and pray for the ministers, for the government, and for peace within the country.
But some Ukrainians seem to have ignored these calls for national unity as more and more Nazi graffiti appears on the walls in Ukrainian cities, and ultra-nationalists are given key government posts. Kiev's Jewish community feels they can no longer entrust their safety to the police. RT's Paula Sleer explains.
The synagogue is empty. The rabbi is packing his office up.
I don't want to leave. I'm pushed to leave. Because I want my children to feel safe. I want my children to be free, to speak openly what they think of. That's the reason. This is not just for me, this is for my children. And for my family.
2 weeks ago, a man was caught on camera painting swastikas on the door of the synagogue. The message he left was chilling: death to the Jews. It's the first time in 20 years a synagogue was vandalized. As you can see, the graffiti's been painted over, but the police only came today to investigate the incident, 2 weeks after it happened. Ever since the unrest started, a number of Jews have been attacked while walking on the streets of Kiev. There are about 100,000 Jews living in Ukraine right now, but one of the country's chief rabbis is urging them to leave. That's as members of the right-wing Svoboda party are now part of the interim government in Kiev.
We felt that nobody will do anything wrong to us because we are protected under the law, Ukrainian law. Nowadays, there is no law. I mean, because everything is changing so fast, and I don't expect anybody would protect the Jews if anything happens.
And so these Ukrainian Jews who do not want to leave are taking matters into their own hands. Self-defense training is being organized by former Israeli army elite forces and security personnel.
I think you need to know how to defend yourself anywhere. If there are such training courses, I will be happy, because people need this in every place and time.
But none of those who participated in the training would speak on camera. This man agreed, but only if we covered his face.
Everyone should learn how to defend themselves, given the situation that we have here. We know the Maidan movement is nationalist. Former Israeli soldiers who have experience, who know how to act in this kind of situation, are helping us to get ready.
Prime Minister Arseniy Yatsenuk has pointed out that his deputy prime minister represents the Jewish community and says his government will fight against any form of fascism. But the people we spoke to don't sound optimistic.
The Jews are always blamed in hard times, and now the time is not easy.
But the risk of staying is just too high. Many of Ukraine's Jews fear that ultra-nationalist attacks will shift from synagogues to human targets. Paula Sleer, RT, Simferopol, Crimea.
The Germans set up the Muslim Brotherhood in 1928, and all the Islamic terrorist organizations can be traced back to the Muslim Brotherhood. Germany controls, for example, Al-Qaeda and Hezbollah and Hamas. So the CIA have been controlled. The first 3 directors of the CIA were all German spies. Hillenkoetter, you go through Bettel-Smith, and then into Alan Welsh Dulles, all working for Germany. And then you can understand why the CIA have been hugely ineffective at times. The same applies to MI6.
It needs a lot more. This is a much bigger thing. What you've focused on is, first of all, the section of Ukrainians which were involved in the events proximate in that area were Nazis. They were part of the Hitler operation in their lifetime. And these are children of the Nazis. We have to remember that there was a certain section working for Hitler, which were part of the Hitler system. They killed a lot of Ukrainians themselves, but they also killed a lot of Poles. The assassinations of Poles under Hitler were done largely by these particular Ukrainians who were part of a Nazi system. If you look at their costumes that they wear at home, the costumes of those Nazi insignia. Their origin is Nazi. And so what you have is you have the United States government now is actually supporting these Nazis. And Nuland is one of the key supporters of these Nazis. They are still Nazis. Their record of killing Poles during World War II is enormous. This is the same people, they wear the same costumes, the same insignia, the same legacy.
And by the way, you were in World War II. I should also add that. It's amazing how long you've been speaking out. It's just amazing. And I know that is a part of the right-wing group being funded by the CIA. You are correct, sir. And they're trying to split between Catholic and then, of course, Orthodox is more pro-Russia. But what's the big geopolitical and why is this such a serious situation?
Because it has nothing to do with Syria as such or things like that. These are byproducts of a much larger scheme of things. What we're on the verge of is World War III, thermonuclear World War III. And that's the big problem we have to try to defeat. Now, there are other problems that come in as subsidiary features of this problem. But as far as I'm concerned, as long as Obama remains president, we're in danger of being involved in a matter of, a few weeks or even days of thermonuclear war globally. That's where we are. And, my interest here on this is partly just inside the United States itself. This presidency is destroying our nation. And it's getting us into a thermonuclear war which we want no part of, and which our real military people want no part of either. There's no reason for a thermonuclear war. As a matter of fact, it will actually cause the extinction of the human species or something like that.
Well, our U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry confirms Washington and its partners are training and arming the insurgents fighting in Syria.
What I did say is there are greater guarantees now that the weapons are being transferred to moderate and to directly the Syrian opposition.
The top U.S. diplomat was speaking at a news conference in Qatar on the last leg of a 9-nation tour of Europe and the Middle East. Kerry is the first American official to admit U.S. training of insurgents there. He says Washington wants to convince Syrian President Bashar al-Assad to change his current calculation. He also mentioned last week's meeting in Rome where European nations joined the U.S. in offering support to the armed opposition. Saudi Arabia, Qatar and Turkey are 3 other nations widely believed to be providing weapons, training and funding for insurgents. Nasser Al-Amari, writer and political commentator, joins me from New York for his take on the situation in Syria. Welcome to the programme. So, Mr. Amari, America is training and arming militants in Syria. That's what the U.S. Secretary of State admitted there in his press conference in Qatar. How legal is that under international law?
Well, this has been going on for a long time now, but I think the American policy in the Middle East is shifting right now, and I think it's shifting in the direction of openly supporting the Syrian insurgents, and they're doing this with the Saudi government as well as other Gulf governments and Turkey. It's interesting that the United States finds itself in bed with the Saudi royal family with the huge violations and egregious violations against the human rights. And whatever system the Saudis are going to support in Syria will be a system, will be a Wahhabi system that will create more difficulty, more bloodshed for the people of Syria. So it's amazing how the United States finds it very easy to work with Saudi royal family with all the violations against the human rights, with the oppressive tactics against the Saudis, as well as other Arab dictators. It's really a shame. It's really a shame that the United States should resort to working closely with the Saudi royal family.
Indeed. And very briefly, I mean, President Bashar Assad has said that the conspiracy against his nation is diminishing, is fading away. Just how much is the Syrian government gaining ground against the insurgents there?
On certain fronts, the Syrian government is doing extremely well, but there are other fronts in the north. For example, the capture of Raqqa, and the action that is going on in various northern parts of Syria. The Syrian insurgents and the foreign fighters are actually gaining ground. So what you have is basically what I believe is a very, very nasty civil war, and it's slowly becoming a regional war, and it's moving in the direction of Lebanon, unfortunately, as well as Iraq. So what I think the United States and the world needs to realize is that this is a sectarian war that needs to come to an end through dialogue.
Indeed. Many thanks to Nasser Omari, writer and political commentator from New York.
Secretary of State John Kerry used his first visit abroad in that capacity to warn that time is running out for a diplomatic solution to the standoff with Iran over that country's alleged nuclear weapons program. Speaking in London, Kerry said that while the window of a diplomatic resolution remains open, but there is only time if Iran makes the decision to come to the table and negotiate in good faith. Meanwhile, Israel's Channel 10, citing unidentified officials, reported that President Obama will use his upcoming visit to Israel to inform Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu that plans are being made for a U.S. military campaign against Iran in June, and to ask that Israel refrain from any military action and to keep a low profile.